Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and I am back. It is Sunday night. Let me just do a quick shout out to chat here. Let's see. Can we say good evening? It's better than good morning, isn't it? Let's go with good evening. Right. And how is everybody? Looks like I'm a little pixelated today. What's up with the picture? How's the connection? I should check my download speed. That would be helpful. Let me do that. Let me do internet speed test. It feels like I'm a little slow here today. Let's see what we have. I don't think I've ever done an internet speed test live during the show. Okay, so my internet speed is 35 Mbps. So let's see. My upload speed is 8.2, roughly 7.9. Honestly, I don't know what the hell it means. Let's do another one here. Internal speed test. Go. Let's see what we have. My download is ooh, 17.5. The upload is what we want here, right? This is the speed from me to you. And that is 9.7. That seems pretty slow, actually. So in any case, we're gonna get through this and have a show. I think that's probably the best thing I could possibly do because, well, what other options do I have except for ending the show or summoning the internet sprites to do my bidding? So here's the plan for tonight. Here's what we're going to talk about. And of course, I'm always open to some creative divergence if it presents itself. We're going to look at Taurus season. You know, and anytime we change signs, I love to kind of take a look at the cast of characters for the signs of the season. And it's been really interesting since I've been doing the astro weather. I get to spend every day looking at a particular person for that sign and learning more about that person in that sign in a kind of an intimate and kind of more personal manner, right? Because we like to think of signs as sort of these blanket assignments, and it's really interesting that there are people that say, "Well, you don't like Aquarians, do you?" So that's not true. Or you don't like Aries, do you? That's not true. Or you don't like Geminis, do you? That's not true. Or you don't like Pisces, do you? That is true. No, I'm just kidding. I love Pisces. Are you kidding me? Some of the most important people in my life are Pisces. The Pisces are the objects d'or of my life. There's not a sign that I don't like. I'll be very honest with you. There's not a sign that I don't like. And yeah, they all have characteristics that are not always flattering or redeeming when you're in the low octaves. They become real cliches. But every sign, when it operates at a higher octave, has the potential of very interesting expression. And it really takes 12 members to be in this orchestra. You know, the celestial symphony, as it were, has to be occupied by 12 different instrumentalists. So we're all playing our tune. And then within that, there are variations, of course, of the various signs themselves. And as I've done this, I have found a tremendous amount of appreciation for the signs, and even people that aren't always the most, how would I describe it, flattering. Like there's still appreciation for the sign because of you can't have appreciation without contrast in a lot of ways. It's that everybody was good and everybody was the not necessarily the same. You wouldn't be able to really appreciate them because there'd be nothing to contrast those people with. So sometimes when you see somebody who's a negative character, then you see somebody else who's in the same sign. It's like, wow, we really appreciate this sign or this person just a little bit more. And even in the so-called negative characteristics, we learned something about particular people and how they work and how they operate. So if you haven't been following my Astro Weather, it takes place 8 o'clock Central Standard Time right here on this channel. And we go for anywhere between 25 to 30, 35 minutes, depending on the amount of material and how verbose I'm feeling at that time in the morning. So, but it's been very interesting. And this last month when we focused on Aries, I really came away with a much deeper appreciation of Aries as a sign. Again, as you just go through the individual characters. And there are people who were Aries that I would never consider to be Aries, like Tiny Tim. For crying out loud, Tiny Tim was an Aries. And if you don't know who Tiny Tim was, he was famous for playing a ukulele, and his big hit was Tiptoe Through the Tulips. I mean, there's no other time or place in the universe that Tiny Tim could exist if it weren't for the late 60s and early 70s. And his marriage to Miss Vicky. I mean, it's just, just a bunch of high strange from a time that, I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody can emerge from the TikTok universe but Tiny Tim was a strange character for that time. And the thing that was really interesting about Tiny Tim is how he died. And he actually died on stage playing Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and he had a heart attack playing Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and people were applauding him. And I thought, well, that is an Aries fucking thing to do, right? That is an Aries way to go out. So even Tiny Tim, who's one of the strangest and kind of least Aries-like people you'll ever see, winds up cohering to this pattern of Aries, kind of going all the way through to the end, no matter what. Like, the show must go on. That's an Aries sentiment. So I really gained a lot of appreciation out of Aries. And prior to that, we had Pisces and, all the various Pisces characters, and again, tons of appreciation. And Aquarius was a trip, right? It was a total trip, because with Aquarius, we saw these extreme personalities emerge. Yeah, and you would get like Angela Davis, and you'd get Andrew Breitbart, like under the same sign. It's like that's how Aquarius just rolls. Taurus is a different character altogether. And one of the things that I think you'll find with Taurus as we go through some of the personalities is physicality. Like, that is a common theme with Taurus, is the physical nature of Taurus. There's also, of course, the more obvious side of Taurus, which is money. Taurus is a sign that's associated with hard assets and money. So you'll run across people who are invested in the sign, literally invested in the sign. And it's a really important part of their life. My grandmother, who was a Taurus, played the stock market. She was the one that got me into the stock market when I was a kid. I actually had stock market accounts when I was a kid, so wish I'd kept them. So this is what happens when you smoke dope. You start throwing that stuff away. It's like, oh yeah, I think I can take some of the stock market money and buy some weed. It's exactly what I did, by the way. It's exactly what I did. I cashed out on some of my stocks so I could get high, I think. What a stupid fucking thing that was. Just a warning. But my grandmother she was a Taurus, and she was always looking at the stock market and investing. And this was, this isn't that here. So I'll go on a little personal journey, and chat. I'll jump in and check in and see who's here, and we'll do a little hangout for a bit. But so my grandmother was born on, if I'm not mistaken, May 15th. And she was born into a piss poor family, Louisiana, Arkansas roots, right? That's how, married my paternal grandfather, whom I'd never met, and married him, I think, at the age of 16. And I think by the time she was 18, she'd have my father. Maybe even before then, wasn't that much longer. Really. Like that's what they did back in the old days. So my grandmother was quite young. I'm not even sure she graduated from high school. She may have graduated from high school, although that's dubious. I never really asked her, never really thought about it, because she had really maneuvered her way into a position of means that really nobody else in her family did. And I'll share a little bit of the story. So she got married young and wound up divorcing my paternal grandfather, and took my father with her to California. Kind of a, again, a little bit of a kind of a Steinbeckian story. Her parents had left that area of the world for a better life, and it was in Southern California, from the Arkansas region, Arkansas, Louisiana, right there. And they were poor, man. These were really working class people, super, super working class people. And my grandmother had to do a number of odd jobs, just to survive. She would have my great grandparents at times watch my father, and while she had to go out and hustle and make money, and eventually she wound up moving to Northern California, and I think she got a job in Northern California, and it was really difficult on my father because he had to spend time in foster homes. She couldn't watch him. She was out basically trying to, this is a Taurus, remember, this is all about Taurus. And she's out trying to make a living. And the foster home experience was incredibly painful for my father. And I think he had some experiences that were terrifying for him. And there was one that was actually really good. So it wasn't all terrible. He had the great fortune of spending time with a family in San Jose, and they're actually kind of a well-known family. Their last name is Fazakis, and they had a bicycle shop in downtown San Jose a long time ago. And so he spent time with them, and they treated him incredibly well. And he learned a little bit about bicycles and bicycle mechanics and fixing bikes. And God, it probably would have been great if he could have been actually raised by these people, but that's not what happened. And so eventually he winds up back with his mother. And she buys a house, right? And everybody in her family is telling her not to buy a house. Oh, don't buy that house. Oh, you won't be able to afford that house. But remember, my grandmother's a Taurus, right? And so she needs that house. She needs that sense of fixity and security. And she wound up, her and the man that she would marry, who I would become to know as my grandfather, even though he wasn't my blood grandfather. They bought a house in a place called Lameda Park, which is in San Bruno, and right down the street from Cappuccino High School. So that's where they started. And then eventually they moved to the next town over, called Millbrae. And that's really where I got to know my grandmother. And she had the house, of course, that stood out on the block. Nobody else had a house like my grandmother. It was the only Tudor in the entire neighborhood in Millbrae. It was a 2-story, and it looked like it came out of the English countryside, and everything else was kind of more flat ranch style houses. It was quite a contrast. And of course, it was at the peak of the neighborhood, sort of at the top of the hill there. And I think that was all done on purpose by her, because she wanted, in her Tauran fashion, to have a sense of, in her mind, opulence, right? And that's what that house kind of looked like. It was sort of the little Tudor mansion at the top of the hill on El Paseo in Millbrae, California. And at the top of that house, there was like a little crow's nest where she spent most of her time. And that's where she would watch CNN when eventually it came on board. and looked at all of her stocks. And that's the kind of person she was. I mean, she was really like incredibly Tauran in that nature. But she had some other sides that were very eccentric, super, super eccentric. And so eccentric that I don't know what prompted her, but she went into therapy. I think she saw a therapist at one time. And she came out and she said that the therapist had said that she had a hard time pronouncing the word narcissist. This is back, I think, the 70s, I think. And she didn't even really understand what the word meant. And we all knew what it meant. We all thought it was very, very funny. And she did have that side of herself, right? She was kind of, she was the empress if you were to look at it from the tarot, and the empress, in my estimation, is an expression of Taurus and Venus, right? Venus/Taurus. And she had some of that. She was like the queen bee in some ways. And to her credit, and I've shared this story before, when I think I might have been in my 20s, and I had some working knowledge of astrology, and I had been on a radio show. It had nothing to do with astrology. It was actually a show that played music, FM. It was a college station. And the guy who ran the show was Dory Stein, who's a pretty cool guy. And the show was called Tangents. And so I won a contest to be on the show with him. And I was on there for a couple hours. I played some music and we talked, and it was a lot of fun. I got to know Dory. He was a super nice guy. He did just a ton for like independent radio and all these really interesting artists that, weren't getting played on the air. And so I played her that recording one time. And so in her head, she took that and she married it with astrology. And she said, you should have your own astrology radio show one of these days. And I was in my 20s, and I kind of chuckled. And in my head, I just thought to myself, well, what's the path to that? Like what radio station would want to have me on there talking about astrology? And at that time, as I got a little bit older, there was an AM station in California where it was one of these, kind of new age radio stations. But you had to buy time, though. Like you could have a show, but you had to buy the time. You had to get a sponsor. And I don't think I was that ambitious back then. But lo and behold, here we are, right? So grandma's kind of prophecy seems to have come true to some extent. And she was clearly a Taurus. I mean, that was, to go from basically living, in a shitty situation in what would you call it? It's not Texarkana, but it's Louisiana, right? To ultimately sitting in the crow's nest in the two-story Tudor at the top of the hill in El Paseo in Millbrae, California. Her, as a Taurus, she had arrived, right? So I saw that firsthand, and that's a story of Taurus. That's how Taurus operates. That's how it rolls. And one of the things about astrology, and I had a really great conversation with a friend who's a Taurus, and she's probably listening to the show. And I don't really want to, drop any names or anything. We had a great conversation and a chat on text, and then we were talking about her practice as a body worker, which is very Tauran, as somebody who does actual physical work, right? Physical therapy, really working with people's bodies. And, we're just, kind of riffing, right? Like riffing about her situation and her ability to, capitalize more on her work, because she's not, being as prosperous, right, or abundant as they say in the business. And one of the things that really dawned on me, is that, and this is what I shared with her, it's like, you're a Taurus and you're ruled by Venus. And this is important. Now, I do think that ultimately the Earth rules Taurus. Maybe if you're playing the geocentric or the heliocentric model, the Earth rules Taurus. So, but that aside, right? Just that aside, let's just use Venus, which is one of the rulers of the two signs, the other being Libra. We know that we know that the Earth doesn't rule Libra, or else we'd have a lot more justice here, wouldn't we? We'd have a lot more justice. We'd have a lot more quality and a lot more balance across the board. So it must be somewhere else out there, right? Got to be somewhere else out there. This is such a tangent, though. I'll have to save it. I'll have to save it anyway. So I'm talking with this friend/client, and it really dawned on me. It's like, okay, you're a Taurus, and ruled by Venus. And what is Venus into? Venus is into beauty, right? Venus is into beauty. It's into, to some degree, scale and proportion. It's into the body. If it's in the Taurus side of things, it's into the body. And I'm like, okay, this is where if you're going to reinvest in your career, we were talking about models of reinvesting in our career. If you're going to reinvest in your career, and you clearly you have a gift in this area, you've done well, you've made money, you've had a thriving practice at a certain point. How do you kind of reinvest and reinvent? Well, you go into that path, right? The path of least resistance as it's defined by the sign, which is Taurus. And again, she's the first decan Taurus. So we're talking about very Venusian territory. So, why fight against the sign? In a lot of ways, and of course there's many factors. You got the rising sign, you got all these other things going on, right? But if you really want to just distill it and simplify it, you have a mission with your sun sign, and your sun sign is defined by certain characteristics. And if you work with those characteristics, and I'm not saying that, there's always outliers, right? There's always outliers with signs, and it's just the way it goes. But if you work within those characteristics of that sign, there's a much better chance that you'll be in the flow versus swimming against the current. Like if you're a Libra and all you want to do is get into a fight with somebody, you're not going to get very far, right? You're just not going to get very far. And if you're an Aries and all you want to do is be apologetic and say you're sorry and try to imitate a Libra, you won't get very far. It's like, why? So why even go there? And I know I'm using extremes, but this is just the fundamental nature of just being a sign in and of itself is noteworthy. And we have all these different things going on, and we can get really fractal and really micro, but we're in Taurus, right? So some of tonight's talk is about keeping it simple, because that's when Taurus is at its best. Taurus is at its best when it keeps things simple. When there's this fundamental understanding of things like, geological or agricultural processes. You plant a seed in the right place at the right time with the right angle of the sun or whatever, and you water it consistently. You make sure that nothing else gets to it, some sort of predation, and it grows. It is really that simple, right? And of course, it's gotten much more muddled and complex over time, but that's how Taurus operates. It's that simple. It comes down to something that comes out of the Native American tradition, and the saying is, well, it's a question, is, does it grow corn? So all these abstractions are in the air, right? And that's the Taurus question, is, does it grow corn? And the answer to the question, the Taurus, theoretically, should be yes or no. And if it doesn't grow corn, then don't plant your seed there. So when we move into a new season, we all get to experience part of that season, part of that evolutionary cycle of the 12 different signs. And so when we get into Taurus season, no matter who we are or where we are, we have to ask ourselves that question. Is it going to grow corn? And with the Mercury retrograde, which is where we are now, of course, in Taurus, starting at the 15th degree, again, we have to ask that question. Where are we putting our resources? Where are we putting our assets? And that's not even the big picture shit. That's not even Jupiter eventually moving into Taurus and joining the money parade, and eventually meeting up with Uranus and things going, really off the charts, right? We're not even talking about that stuff. We're talking about really basic fundamental questions and principles. Where's your money? Number one. What's it doing? Number two. And number three, ultimately, is anything you have, whether it's your money or your time or effort, and money theoretically is part of the equation of time and effort, but not always. Not always. When you get into Scorpio, there's a lot of shortcuts to that. But usually that's how it's worked, right? Put in an honest day's work, get an honest day's wages, time and effort equals the output of the money. So it's a different discussion, but this is where we are now. And it's really interesting because there's a lot of discussion going on about precious metals, a lot. And it's so interesting that so there are stories where people are trying to extract their gold from these banks that are holding the gold, or they have the gold certificate. Remember, this is Mercury retrograde. As soon as we went into Taurus, coming right off of that eclipse, what do we have? We had a bank heist. We had a gold heist, and it was in Canada. Now, my theory is that the bank heisted its own gold. That's what I think. That's what I think. Because that's what we've seen. Am I wrong? What we've seen with these banks, starting with Sam Bankman-Fried and his fake ass bank that was set up for his fake ass token, and then we had SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, and we've had some of these other banks, and they're basically just draining money from the bank. The banks are robbing money from themselves. That's what's going on right now. So we've seen it in the bank setting. We've seen it in the crypto setting. Well, why wouldn't we see it in the hard asset, gold and bullion setting? I think if you drill down deep enough, you would find, because this stuff it's like you can't pull that off unless it's an inside job, right? And they were talking a little bit about this on Quite Frankly on Friday night, where I had a brief sort of appearance there for about 10 minutes or so. And they were talking about it on Quite Frankly. And they were talking about how, the back in the days, right, a lot of mafia money was made at airports. And what they would do is they would actually steal shit. They would steal shit. All of a sudden, your stuff would just go missing, right? Your bag would go missing. You put in a claim for your baggage, or things would go missing, right? So what they did is they had people working on the inside at the various airlines, and they knew what was coming off of planes. And they knew if it was if it was a air freight, they knew it was coming off the air freight. Sometimes if it was a passenger flight, people go through luggage. Like they will go through luggage, and they'll let somebody know on the other end, or maybe doesn't even make it to the other end. But this was one of the big ways that the mob was making money. Like they would steal shit from the airports, and of course they'd resell it, right? And when you have really low overhead, all you're doing is you're paying some people to keep their mouths shut. And as long as you're making, 3 to 4 times, 5 times, 10 times that value, it's worth it. So they talked about this, but I don't think this is what happened in Canada. I think probably, this is just my hunch, is that the bank probably stole it. That's what I think. So here's again, this happens right when we go into Taurus, right when we come right out of this eclipse, right out of the eclipse, we have this big heist. So what does the bank do? Let's just go with me for a minute here. And I don't know a lot of the details, and I don't know a lot of people that do. There are some out there, but they're scant and they won't let them out. But my 2-4 projector, 2-4 splenic projector gut tells me that the bank was in on it. Wherever it was going, they arranged for this to happen. And I'll tell you why. Because ultimately, they're going to be able to claim that. They'll claim that loss. And maybe they get a portion of the loss. If indeed the police, or I think, where was it? Was it Toronto or Quebec? Maybe the state, they do their investigation. Who knows? Maybe if a couple of people are paid off along the way there and they keep their mouth shut, right? And they just keep turning up dead end and dead end and dead end and dead end and dead end. And then what happens? Eventually the bank says, well, we need to be compensated for that. Just like all these other banks have said, we need to be. So let's say they get, and the number was, it was like, what did it start off at? It started off at like 100 million, then it went to 50 million, then it was down to 22 million, right? Who knows really what the number is? But let's say it's 22 million. Would the bank then be credited back for $22 million? Would the Canadian government play that game with them? Because it's the Canadian government who theoretically would amortize that loss, right? Maybe they would. It's not as if the Canadian government has, or any government for that matter, has been known to be all that fair and just recently or lately, have they? No. So the bank wins both ways because it was intended to reach them, if I'm not mistaken. So they'll more than likely get the money. Or maybe the airport, whoever. The insurance policy pays it out, and then they have the gold. So now they get it both ways, right? But it's interesting that it happened right when we got into Taurus. Right when we go into Taurus, we get into hard metals, precious metals, and then Mercury retrograde, right? It's gone. It's moving in the other direction, or whatever direction it's moving in, right? And everybody loves a good heist movie. So I'm sure there'll be a script. Whoever probably did the fucking heist is probably writing the script right now, and then they'll get paid 3 times. So that's where we are. We're in Taurus season, and we're not dealing with abstractions. Aries doesn't really deal with abstractions either. However, that said, Aries does throw itself into the breach. Taurus doesn't always throw itself into the breach. Taurus calculates, well, how much is this going to cost me? How much will this cost me? Let me figure that out. Okay. I'll throw myself into the breach. Now that I've determined the cost benefit analysis here, it's worth it. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I feel like now that we're in this Mercury retrograde, which started in the second decan, in the Virgo decan, people are nervous about their money, and people have every right to be nervous about their money. It is a shaky situation. And it'll eventually go back into that first decan, and that's when people are going to really look for something, hard asset, tangible asset. So these are tricky times financially, and they'll be even how do I say it? More greatly exacerbated, expanded upon when Jupiter moves into Taurus. Now, there could be some windfalls through Jupiter because, of course, Jupiter is exalted in Taurus. And there can certainly be some windfalls, but Taurus also makes things bigger. And This could also be one of those periods, especially really early on, when Jupiter goes right into Taurus, it's squaring Pluto. I think Pluto's at the final degrees before regresses back into Capricorn. And, that could be one of those periods where people just wish they had more than they have. And I've already kind of experienced a little bit of that. And not that I'm crying poor. Trust me, I'm not here to do that. That's not my intention at all. I'm I feel blessed to be able to do this for a living and be reasonably compensated for it. And there are things that you want to do and or want to move into or explore, and the assets, the resources just aren't quite there. And I kind of went through that this last week, which I talked about on Astro Weather. And it was like, what the fuck have I been doing these last 13 years? So be careful. Be careful. That's kind of in the air, right? That's kind of as the economic opportunity theoretically shrinks, and we begin to kind of look around and go, oh, well, what can we do? Or how can we fortify our economic position? Or how can we invest in something new? And if those things aren't there, and we don't have those things immediately, it can become challenging. And I think with the retrograde, it makes it really easy to look back on a lot of mistakes that we've made financially and in the material world in general. Like you can even look back on certain jobs you might have taken or didn't take or whatever. Tonight, I'm going to talk about more. We're going to get into the Taurus thing more, but we're going to. I saw a really compelling documentary last night, and it's on the singer John Waite. And some of you might be familiar with John Waite from his group, The Babies, and his big hit, I'm Not Missing You at All. And Amazon just released, I don't know if they did it or somebody else did it, but it's a really, really, really good video. And I highly recommend watching it. And it starts off with John Waite just climbing the walls during the lockdown because he wants to get out and tour and sing. And the guy, to this day, the guy's got a fucking incredible voice. Like he can still hit the same notes that he did when he was with the Babies. I mean, you would have to, if you weren't looking at the long hair and the wrinkles, you'd probably see the orange-haired mop-top guy from the 70s and the 80s that people resemble. So I'm going to look a little bit at his chart tonight for a number of reasons. It's a very interesting chart, a very interesting story, and a very interesting connection with Alison Krauss. And I'm going to look at it in terms of his story, his chart, his relationship with America, and this fascinating connection with Alison Krauss. So we're going to get into that tonight as well. It's going to be a kind of an interesting just trip into astrology. And we're also going to look at Ron DeSantis's chart. And I've had people request that I take a look at his chart. Now, I have not been able to find a definitive birth time for Ron DeSantis. So I need to put that in as a disclaimer. But I did my best to rectify his chart in what I think he might be. And I could be completely wrong, but I'll tell you what my reasons why I chose a particular time and sign, rising sign, or when we get there. We'll take a look at the chart at the moment. We'll run through some Taurus personalities, and that should really give us the bulk of the show and probably take us into about 8:30 tonight. So before I get into chat, let me just do a quick shout out to True Hemp Science. And speaking of Taurus, how can we not talk about hemp and CBD when we're in the Taurus season? We have to. We have to talk about it. Here we are, right here. So True Hemp Science, of course, is a sponsor of the show. These are products that I personally recommend because I use them. and they're terrific. And the thing I love about True Hemp Science, if you haven't figured out by now, is that it is a homegrown, Main Street, bootstrap American business. And, you know, you could easily go down to Whole Foods or natural grocers, and you could buy some CBD product by Gaia. Gaia makes a CBD product. There's a lot of the major supplement companies that make CBD products. And that's fine, but why not support somebody who has their boots on the ground, literally? And so when you purchase True Hemp Science products, not only are you getting some of the best organic CBD that you can find, you're also helping a business grow. And when you help a business grow, it's just part of the American dream, right? So does it grow corn? Yeah, it does. Absolutely. We know hemp has manifold purposes, and a lot of the hemp, a lot of the energy around hemp has gone into this area, right? For CBD, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's many other things that you can do with hemp, many other things, but the real focus has been on the medicinal side of it. So if you go to truehempscience.com and you purchase $100 worth of their product and you type in 15MINS, that's 15MINS, what you'll get is free product. And everybody likes free product. Everybody likes free stuff, good free stuff, not shitty free stuff, but good free stuff. And if you spend $150 or more, you get free shipping. So just type in 15, that's the number 1, the number 5, and the combination of the capital M, capital I, capital M, capital S, 15 mins when you check out. And that's what you get. Free product, True Hemp Science. There you go. You know what's amazing about life? When you get a good night's sleep, the quality of your life is just so much better. My God. I think I slept about 10 hours last night. It was 10 or 11 hours. And I can tell the difference. I can really tell the difference. It's like, I actually feel accessible here. I feel accessible. This is a good feeling. All right. Let's go into chat. Talking a bit. You guys have been chatting away. Probably having your own conversations. Let's see. We got Love of Scorpio, Susie Gemini, Miss BC. I think Jamie Foxx probably has a heart event brought on by chronic cocaine use. I'm doing a little hieroglyphics here. I'm doing a little sign language. Although Jamie is probably taking a walk on the wild side. Let's see who else we have. Jamie, if I'm not mistaken, Sagittarius. All right. Let's see. Seems like there's foul play with Diddy. What's up with Diddy? What did Diddy do? What did Diddy do? Sean Combs sold his soul. I'm just being honest. What's going on? Diddy says only 2 people allowed to call him by his birth name. Diddy says only Jay-Z and his mom are allowed to call him Sean. So back in the day, there was so many reveal videos. Like I think it was around 2010, 2011, right around there. There were a lot of inside hip hop videos that were being revealed at that time or being made at that time. And let's just say Diddy, Puffy showed up in a lot of them. And they weren't all that, how shall we say, flattering. But the man did a few things. It's part of the game, part of the business. He's not alone. All right. Who else do we have? Let's see. Love a Scorpio. Interesting. Now remember, with the Santis chart, I'm playing with the birth time, so I'm doing a little rectification with it. Posted my question about Jay-Z, Trump, and Nasir Jones to your previous live. Okay, Jay-Z, Trump, and Nasir Jones. Where's the question? I have to find the question. Post it again. Let me see it. I'm just in chat. Apparently, Diddy is called the gay gatekeeper, and Jamie spoke out about these. Those videos have been around for a long time. Long time. Like there is this one video. There's a woman, it may be still up. There was this one video where this woman who'd been in the industry, she talked about it. And her description of what went on at these parties is like beyond the pale, really beyond the pale. And so what happens, this is the formula, is that you get hooked early on with like really tame low-level stuff, right? You get hooked with basically orgies. That's what happens. And it's like, oh yeah, this is great. Look at this. And everybody's like, fit and whatever, right? And it's all for one and one for all. And of course, there's copious amounts of drugs involved. And it's like, yeah, you're in this like really blissed out, intense, incredible, super over the top, hypersexual environment. And then it's like, yeah, I want more of that, right? The next one you go to, it's a little bit darker, right? They bring in some of the dungeon stuff, right? They start to take you down, right? That's just a gateway drug. They start to take you down, and then before you know it, you're in debasement. You're in debasement of the whole thing, and then what happens after that is, well, somewhere along the way you make a deal. Like you make a deal when you're in the sweet spot. That's what happens. You make a deal in the sweet spot. Oh yeah, I'm all good for this. I'm all, and then after that, once you make the deal, then the elevator goes down. That's what Prince was talking about. By the way, the 21st was the 7th anniversary of Prince's death. 7th anniversary. It's been 7 years since Prince has passed away. That's one Saturn. That's 1/4 of a Saturn cycle, quarter of the Saturn cycle. Total Saturn cycle would be roughly 28 and a half years, right? So we're quarter of the way through that Prince Saturn cycle. It's mind-blowing. It feels like it was just yesterday in a lot of ways. And I've talked a lot about the death of Prince and how it was incredibly symbolic. Happened on the Queen's birthday, number one. And it was 220 days before it was either Trump got elected or inaugurated. I forget which day. It was 220 days. I think it might have been the election. So it was, let's see, May 21st to November 9th. So then you have the number 22, right? The master number 22. And that starts on that day. It starts the Purple Revolution. That's when Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton show up and she gives her weak ass concession speech. And they're wearing purple. And I'm like, look at that. This is a sign. This is the next color revolution, and it's the Purple Revolution. And of course, Prince was the purple one, and his group was the Revolution, right? New power generation comes after the revolution. And then again, all part of the symbolism, where does the revolution start? It starts in Minneapolis, which is where Prince was from. And what is Prince? A Gemini. And what is Minneapolis? The Twin Cities. Right. And it all this stuff is just so symbolic, So symbolic. It was all happening. The true node was in Gemini. George Floyd's event happens in the sign of Gemini. And Minneapolis is ground zero for the whole thing. So, yeah, what was that? That was 2 days ago, the 21st, 7th anniversary of the death of Prince. And he was in the elevator going down, right? That's what happened. Theoretically, he was in the elevator going down. And he talked about that. He talked about going down the elevator, and it's part of what happens to these people. And, in order to maintain your power and your position and, whatever vestige of earthly sanity, theoretically, you have to continue to participate, in these parties, in these beyond debauched acts. So, yeah, all that stuff was breaking around 2011, and it was like, oh my God, look at this, look at this, look at this. I'll tell you another guy who was really up on it was Rick Griffin from Public Enemy. You probably know him as Professor Griff. He was into all of this way before a lot of other people. And in fact, it's what got him kicked out of Public Enemy in a lot of ways. All right, what else we have? Let's see. T. Jordan, what's going on, Thomas? Speaking of, I need to schedule a massage. Man, the massage world is really tricky. I love having, body work, but post-COVID, a little tricky. Just saying. Not saying you can't or shouldn't. Just use discretion. Discretion advised. What do y'all think about Afro Man throwing his hat in the presidential ring? I don't know. What kind of hat is it? I think it depends on the hat. Let's see. Taurus moon here. Pengredi. What's going on, Pengredi? Steve Letcher, a good friend, worked night shift in the mid-1960s, did college in 3 years during the day. He bought stocks with extra money and now enjoys 30,000 plus tax-free. He became a bank executive. Excellent man. Some people get it. Let's see. I heard Diddy did the initiations with Usher when he was 13 and 14. That makes sense. AM says tonight, Northern Lights supposedly visible in northern states in the Northeast between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. We'll be done by then. So you guys get out there and see if you can see those Northern Lights. Lala HK says Afro Man, question mark. That's what I'm asking about. Leela Marie, giving us a shout out. Precious Humans, right back to you. Leela Marie. Looking forward to seeing you in October. Let's see. Premonition, being a Taurus rising sign, I agree. Eric E. Taurus wants to see value, return on investment. That's right. Do work, receive value. Hubby's chart is loaded in Taurus. It's good for me. He brings stability and consistency. Simplicity is greatness. Absolutely. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Diane Evans. I'm Taurus, weeding my garden right now. Good for you, Diane. I think this Mercury retrograde could be useful. This is from Eric E. And productive if we keep focused on where it's in our chart. Get rid of stuff you can't use or sell it during this Mercury retrograde. Tondar comes in. Hey, friends, I'm playing blocks with baby, seeing if I can build faster so she can take it down. I love that. There says a Mercury retro in Taurus. I'm great at helping others with money. Me, not so much. Well, Claire, you should be in demand right now. Who else do we have? Is it stealing if you steal from yourself? Joni, that's funny. That is really funny. That's a good question. I would say no. Lady Virgo, it's good to know how to grow food, provide heat without the grid. Go watch our show with the Crimmies 3 weeks ago and the whole copper thing. I think people need to, that's a total Uranus and Taurus moment. Susie says, I buy XRP, XLM, not financial advice. Disney's movie Elementals coming soon. Ripple and Lumens and the characters predictive. Ooh, nice one, Susie Gemini. Let's see, who else do we have? Oh, is it St. Anne's Farm birthday? Happy birthday, St. Anne's Farm. Lord Devi, XRP is the only crypto I've ever gotten. Our Santis, the same will happen with the silver. Yep, more than likely. T. Jordan says luggage going through San Juan was sketchy in the 70s. I bet. They had a racket there. Here's Ryan. What's going on, Ryan? Gotti love. Who doesn't love a good heist? I love heist movies. Let's see. Forest Fairy Terrace has agreed. Stephen Lady Virgo. I live in my 100-acre woods at the middle of nowhere. Wood heat needed here in the north, and greenhouses are short growing season. Nice. Nice. Cato's here. What's going on, Cato? Grateful Dogs, Knight of Cups, Neo, Harriet Bowie. Let's see who else. Speaking of hard assets, remember every woman is sitting on $1 million. So I had a really interesting conversation with our good friend, Mr. John Levi, last week. And we were talking about the whole Federal Reserve. And by the way, John's a Taurus. So we'll have to do a happy birthday shout out to John at some point. But John has done a lot of research, of course, on the whole Federal Reserve birth certificate issue, right? And what we're worth. What we're worth. Like, we are the collateral. Like, the money in the banks and all the phony Federal Reserve notes are nothing. We are the collateral, right? And when you have a Social Security number, that is like your banking number. That's your banking number. I don't think he'll want to be saying this, but here, I'll anonymize it. There are people who have used their Social Security number as like a routing number to buy things. Have you heard about this? Now, some of them have been successful. Others have gotten caught somewhere kind of in the process, right? Let's just say I know somebody who did this and tried to and did it as an experiment, and use their Social Security number to buy some goods on Amazon, and the transaction went through. It was like it recognized it, right? And then somewhere downstream, it was like it went through a couple of different filters, and it was like, we had a glitch in the system. So let's why don't we halt this transaction? But that speaks to the real value, right? Like, we are the value, we are the commodity. Like, everything is based on our value. From the moment you're born, there's a value assigned to your name and your number. So we're the collateral against the debt. They don't really care about money. They'll just keep printing money. They don't really care. But we are the human resource of the entire operation. So when we get into a period like this, when clearly it looks like, they want less of the human resource versus more of the human resource, that gets you to think that, they're really looking at a major fundamental shift in currency, because thus far we've been the currency. We've been the human batteries. We've been the thing that has powered the system. Whether we're working or not, our mere presence as a chit, as a credit, has been fueling most of our financial experience. So some people have gone down that rabbit hole and done the name reclamation and the whole thing, and they're theoretically out of the system, right? They've removed themselves from the system being able to collateralize on their name and their number. It's a very arduous process, and one that is fraught with pitfalls and landmines. And if you don't do it right, you can get really fucked. And I'm not here to advocate doing it or not doing it. That's a personal choice and decision. And some people, probably some in chat, have spent an inordinate amount of time in this area. And there are plenty of people online that go into this at great length. I think Crow 777 spends a lot of time in this area. That's Taurus territory. We are the value of the system. Literally, we are it, right? And now it's interesting that they want less of us, and it means that the value of the system is changing, and the collateralization is moving away from the physical herd into something very, very different, right? Pluto and Aquarius promises, because Pluto's resources. This is one thing that people have to keep in mind always. Pluto is resources. It's usually other people's resources, right? That's how Pluto operates. It's other people's resources, other people's money. When you go into the 8th house, you're getting into banking. You're getting into the fractional interest reserve lending system. That's all Scorpio money magic. It's total Scorpio money magic. It's creating something out of nothing, right? So Pluto is always about assets. And with Pluto and Aquarius, the assets become very, very different. When Pluto went into Capricorn, it was like, okay, let's raid whatever's left. Let's just raid whatever's left. I'll tell you when they really, really went after the money was Pluto, when Pluto was in Scorpio. When Pluto went into Scorpio in right around 85, and then you're really getting into second term Reagan, that's when all the stuff started, just the bones started to be picked over. When Pluto went into Scorpio, big time. And you had the whole supply side economics. Of course, the Soviet Union theoretically falls during that time, and they go in and, the locusts start to move into the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, whether they're the American industrialists or, the Russian oligarchs, right? During that Pluto and Scorpio time, there was an intense amount of money that was being pilfered. The system was being drained in a really, really big way, right? So that by the time we get into Pluto and Sagittarius, we need a big distraction. And of course, that happens on 9/11/2001. And then, there's this theory that all these records were in Building 7, which I don't have a problem with, right? And even when who was talking about this? I think it was Frank on Friday night show, and even the gold, the gold that theoretically Giuliani sent all these firefighters into really what became the killing fields, where buildings 1 and 2 were, and all the asbestos that had been released. Right. The rumor was that they were sent in there because there was about $50 million worth of gold that was in the basement. Was it Building 1, I think, or building? I forget which one it was, but they were there to recollect that gold once it cooled enough. That was their mission. And again, that's kind of that is a really, really weird symbol of alchemy, right? It's like you have these two structures that symbolically mean something very specific, and then they implode and everything gets incredibly hot, right? And then out of it comes this gold that they are actually taking away. And it is strangely alchemical, right? It is this alchemical act of destruction. And then they extract the literal gold out of that destruction. So that's again, that's a lot of, we're into a lot of like scorpionic energy, Pluto and Scorpio energy, even though at that time it was Sagittarius. And that sets us off on the holy wars of the 2000s and, the crusades into Iraq and the crusades into Afghanistan and the crusades into Libya. And it's all a movement away and a big distraction because of this massive economic shortfall that happened. And by the way, is about to come at the end of the 2000s. So when we get into the 2010s, 2009 specifically, Pluto is in Capricorn, and that's it, right? They're just, by that point, they're making money off of these, all of these mortgages that were just negative, right? They were these cancerous, tumorous assets that just kept getting traded on, and people were making money on these just really bad mortgages that were never going to be able to surface and get paid off, right? Because the people were just, number one, the interest rates were going to go up, and number two, the people that were buying them were not qualified. And that was it, man. That was really it. We go into Pluto and Capricorn, and that's pretty much, they're making money off of the burnt offerings. And then at that point in time, the country is just gone, economically gone. And that's where China comes into play. And that's where China begins to alleviate a lot of this so-called debt, right? That's behind the scenes. And so this is where China moves into this position. And again, we're into Pluto now, right? Pluto, it's all about Pluto and other people's money and assets and resources. So in Aquarius, we're talking very different versions of that, very different versions of value. And we do get into things like cryptocurrencies or digital economies. It's going to be very different than it used to be. There's also, I think, inside of Pluto and Aquarius, the power of collectivization. And I'm not talking about collectivization as it relates to the state, but it's people bringing their resources together under Pluto and Aquarius. Somebody brings this and somebody brings that and somebody brings this, somebody brings that. And next thing you know, you've got something, right? And that'll be interesting because, when you get into Aquarius, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about the wheels on a spoke, and everybody's a wheel on a spoke. And then they're all connected to this hub and this center. And that center is organizing principle for whatever people, want to organize around. And some of this is just going to happen strangely and spontaneously. And you'll find yourself in situations with people you have very little in common with, except maybe staying alive. And at that point, you'll realize you have a lot in common with these people. And it's like, well, shit, I didn't really vibe with you before, but, I'm standing across from you now, and this is what we got. And the other person, I'm the same way. And I was like, well, okay, well, let's try to, bury the hatchet or figure out how we can help one another. And I think that's really what it's going to come down to with Pluto and Aquarius. I keep calling it strange bedfellows, right? We're going to have strange bedfellows during this time, but ultimately it's going to be the thing that will, I think, get us through this period. Now, are we, are all the switches going to be flipped and we're all going to have the new magic economy, the new magic technology and all that stuff? Who knows? Maybe somewhere down the line that might be, a byproduct of this, but I see it more as necessity, where people who are very, very different will wind up combining their efforts. And it is going to be through difficulty and necessity that's going to happen. That's going to be the thing that's going to bring us together, because nothing else will bring us together. We're so divided. We're such a house divided now. There may be some people who might be so damn stubborn. It's like, oh, fuck that person. I remember them. They told me I had to wear a mask when I walked into that store, and they gave me hell every day. Like, okay, at your own risk, right? Like at your own risk, holding deep grudges like that. There are some people, and I will say this, and I'm trying to be fair and honest. There are some people who will have shown who they are, and they ultimately cannot be trusted. I'm just being straight up. Okay. Ultimately, there are some people who have shown who they are and they cannot be trusted. There are other people who, during the duress of the last 3 years, made decisions based on some form of pressure, and that they had to make or conform to the situation. So for whatever reason, that they had to survive, stay alive, whatever, right? But they weren't the people that were punishing you, right? They weren't the people that were taking some kind of sadistic glee in watching you as a so-called free thinker or somebody who was engaged in the expression of your personal rights. There were people that were of incredibly bad spirit during that time, and it showed and it came out. And I think ultimately those would be people that I'd be very wary of hitching my wagon to under any situation, including one in duress, right? There are other people who, you know, had to do things, and maybe their political leanings tend to be a bit more status quo, right? Or maybe a bit more towards the CNN side of the dial, but they're not the people that were like the jackboot thugs who took extreme pleasure out of watching other people have to, grovel, right? Because that's what happened during that time. There were a lot of people who were quote unquote disempowered in their lives, and all of a sudden they had some power. Now it's like, I know it's not. I'm on the mass side. I'm on the mass side. I'm on the shot side, and that's the right side of history. And I have the moral power and authority vested in me right now because it's the signs of the time, or the sign of the times. And you know that there were people that were like that. I ran into them, and they just couldn't wait to like put the fucking screws to you and demand that you put a mask on, right? Under the most inane situations. Those are the people I'd be wary of. Other people who had to do something in order to get by, and maybe, they had to defend their situation or their territory from a very tenuous and weak place. You may find you might have some more in common with people like that. Just saying, right? Just saying. That's Pluto and Aquarius. Those are where the assets are going to be. The assets are going to be ultimately in finding what you do uniquely, what another person does uniquely, and then bringing those things together. And it may be financial, it may not be financial. Could be whatever you're bringing to the table, right? That's what Pluto and Aquarius will do. So when we talk about Pluto, we're talking about assets. And in Aquarius, those are going to be very, very different. Very, very, very different. All right. Why don't we take a look at some Tauruses? Let's take a little cruise through the gallery of Taurans, famous Taurans. And, I like to try to find commonality with the signs. And let's just see if we can find some commonality. All right. I think the top line Tauruses, to me, it's like, they're so fucking interesting. Numbers 1 through 6. I don't know how they got to number 3, but apparently he falls under that category. All right. Your number 1 Taurus, the vegan and lover of animals, Adolf Hitler. There he is, right there. I was thinking of looking at Hitler's chart on 420, and it's always a controversial thing to do. When I looked at his chart, I came away with the impression that he did not have the most impressive chart. Just saying, right? Like his son, I think, was in the 7th house. But he did have some interesting trines going on with Mercury, and I think was it Jupiter, Pluto or Jupiter or Uranus, you could see the oratory thing in his chart. I would call it like you look at the chart, oh, that's fucking Hitler's chart, right? It was like, oh, wow. It's a little underwhelming for somebody of such evil stature. Maybe it's better that he didn't have a great chart. Just saying. Right next to him, the aforementioned Queen Elizabeth. I mean, these are two figures that really define the 20th century in a lot of ways. After that, you have, now this is, I don't know where they get Homer Simpson from. Homer Simpson's a Taurus, apparently, and the third most popular Taurus ever of all time. Saddam Hussein, Taurus. Now, what's interesting here is that we have a couple of, well, dictators, theoretically, right? And you go to number 6 and you run into Lenin, and you 3 of the top line Tauruses are theoretical dictators. Maybe throw in Queen Elizabeth. Now you got 4. Shakespeare, whoever Shakespeare was, and there's some debate around who Shakespeare actually was. His birth date is in the sign of Taurus, right? And these are all 3 very different characters, Lenin, Hussein, and Hitler. What links all 3 of them are their relationships with corporations. The Bolshevik Revolution was powered and funded by corporations. The bankers, the East Coast bankers, along with the Rothschilds, funded the Bolshevik Revolution. They also had a hand in the creation of the Third Reich. They're connected. They're connected. Both of these operators and operations were both connected by corporations and bankers. Interesting, right? And even Hussein be connected to the oil companies in Iraq. They got him out because he became a liability. They wanted that oil. They wanted that oil in southern Iraq, and they didn't want to pay him anymore. That's a big part of it. The other part was supposedly, right, like he had a lot of ancient tech and antiquities, right, from Babylon. So when they raided his palace in Iraq, that was part of what they were looking for. So the story goes. All right. So top line, what do we have? We have a social reformer dictator, and even Saddam Hussein was a social reformer. If you look at Iraq, at the Ba'athist Party, they were kind of more socialist. Women were not forced to wear burqas. They could go to college. They could work in corporate or government business. You would think that it was a progressive government inside of the very heavy, hardcore Islamic states in that area. Saddam Hussein was not one of them. Wasn't one of them. Right. So even Saddam Hussein was a bit of a reformer. So Lenin would think he was a reformer. Hussein would think he was a reformer. And I would say Hitler would think he was a reformer. But here we go. 3 of the top line 6 all share something in common. Throw in Queen Elizabeth, who has her own legacy, right? Which is too long to get into. Let's go to the next row. Grant, who's a drunkard and a tyrant. He's a Mason. Cromwell, who is a strategist general, right? Then you have Willie Mays, who's still alive, by the way. Willie Mays, known mostly for his career with the New York Giants and the San Francisco Giants, although he made the All-Star team at the age of 39 when he was actually playing for the New York Mets. And Willie's a Mason, by the way. He's a Freemason. Grant's probably a Freemason. Right next to Willie, you have George Brett. So now we have physicality, 2 baseball players. George Brett batted, I think, .364. Now here we go. It's like we're playing Hollywood Squares here. You got Nicholas II, the Tsar, right? Caddy corner from Lenin. Both their Tauruses. And what did they want? He wanted to get rid of him. He wanted his wealth. And what was really interesting is when I was on with Dr. Longo on Wednesday night, Andreas Zertis was on there, and he was actually talking about how there was this huge push for creating like all these automobiles in Russia when the Tsar was there. And then, of course, the Bolsheviks come in and they basically just, take over and shut everything down, except, they've got their fingers on the pulse with production, right? So it's a very interesting kind of build up takeover, right? And even with Hitler, there was a massive build up with World War I, World War II. Joe Louis, Taurus, right? With Willie Mays, Taurus. So now we're seeing physicality. George Brett looks like he's had a few. George Brett, famous for corking his bat. Let's go down. We got Joseph Broz Tito. We got another theoretical tyrant, right? And then we have Hirohito. So now we're hitting trifectas here. Here's another tyrant, Barbara Streisand. I'm just kidding. The Voice, Audrey Hepburn, Tchaikovsky, and then you got Pol Pot. Okay, so, and Grant, by the way, was a bit of a tyrant too. He was a tyrant, drunkard, tyrant. All right, so here we go. We have dictator, some people, tyrant, scourge of the earth, 20th century, dictator, tyrant, drunken general tyrant, benevolent tyrant, tried to turn it around, but couldn't make it happen. Absolutely bloody, certifiably nuts tyrant, Hirohito, the guy who led Japan into World War II, and Tito from Yugoslavia, who unfortunately is a bit of a tyrant and winds up going from the non-Axis side, or from the Axis. Well, I guess he was on the Axis side, wasn't he, for a while? And then he gets subsumed by the Russians. So, man, seeing a little bit of a pattern here, you Taurus tyrants. Harry Truman, he was a Taurus. John Paul II, Taurus, connection to World War II, by the way. Stevie Wonder, Taurus. George Clooney, Taurus. Duke Ellington, Taurus. The Red Baron, von Richthofen. Interesting for a guy that was so famous for his aerial kills. He was a Taurus. Jimmy Stewart was a Taurus. Robespierre, an absolute fucking tyrant. I'm getting a bit of a different picture now of Tauruses. You're all so sweet on the outside, aren't you? You're all so sweet and touchy feely. And in your core, you basically want to decapitate the rest of us. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you a little shit. But Robespierre is a fucking tyrant. Okay. So what can we start to derive from this? Power, money and resources are power. But somebody like our friend over here, Mr. Lenin, clearly understood the power of psychology. Now, remember, the other side of Taurus is Scorpio. Remember that. These are people that use psychological tactics, especially from the tyrannical side of things. Very interesting. All right, let's go down to the next line. Shirley Temple, tyrant. Now, I don't know if she was or not. I don't know if she was probably a nice little girl on the set. I don't know. Natasha Richardson, Andre the Giant, Taurus, big mountain of a guy. Bing Crosby, he's got that rich, resonant voice of a Taurus. I'll never forget him singing Silent Night with David Bowie. Bing Crosby lived in Hillsborough, California. We had a family friend that lived in Hillsborough and said that he used to stagger around the neighborhood quite a bit. Bing had a bit of a hard time with the old bottle there. But, again, he did really well, right? Did incredibly well. Lived in Hillsborough, had to bring Bing Crosby open. And I think in a lot of ways, Bing Crosby is kind of the first rock star. Like he's kind of quasi. Like I really think the first rock star is Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra is the first rock star. Even though there's nothing really rock and roll about Frank, he's iconic. But you don't really get to Frank without Bing Crosby, because Bing Crosby's a crooner. And in a lot of ways, he's kind of the first Gentile crooner. Prior to Bing Crosby, there was Al Jolson. Right? So you have Bing, who kind of moves into that kind of that mainstream territory, and it's somebody who's known for their voice, right? They sing with big bands, so now the singer is front and center. They're not just part of some choral group or some ensemble, right? Now the singer becomes the focus of the band, and Bing Crosby is a guy that becomes known for that, and then very quickly passes the torch to Sinatra. And then I think after that, he very quickly passes that torch to Elvis in that kind of lineage. Let's see. Then you got Cher. So we're seeing some singers, right, with Taurus. We have Cher. We have Kat Hepburn, Mordecai, and Anilowitz. You have Marconi, the guy who theoretically stole the whole idea. Was it Marconi or the other guy? Maybe it's the other guy. I think Marconi worked with Tesla, didn't he? That's sort of the backstory with Marconi, that he kind of jumped on the Tesla stuff. That's the backstory with Marconi. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Okay, Hank Azaria. I had a client who was his assistant. Adele. We got another big voice here. You're going to see voices with Taurus. H.H. Holmes, Keith Haring, the graffiti artist, Rudolph Valentino, sort of the male side of the Taurus factor. Well, he certainly did not have the Taurus voice. That was Valentino did not have the voice to go with the looks. That really killed him. James Monroe, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. He just reeks of Taurus, doesn't he? Even the name The Rock, right? That's a Taurus name. And I'm still, if there is another election at some point in time, I would not be surprised if Dwayne The Rock Johnson winds up becoming president. Sid Vicious, Taurus. Poor Sid. Believed his own myth. Catherine the Great. She had an affinity for horses. I don't know about bulls. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Mark Zuckerberg, Taurus. Seems like Tauruses sometimes will find another idea that somebody else has. Capitalize on it. Lee Liberace, he's a Taurus, my God. I mean, he's fucking gaudy, right? Very talented dude, though. Super talented. Let's see, Sachin Tendulkar or Tendulkar, Billy Joel and Liberace, right there. They got something in common, right? Oh, look at that. Speaking of money, other people's money, Karl Marx, Taurus, Das Kapital, baby. We're getting a bit of a picture here. Pluto, Scorpio. On the other side of this whole thing, the positively Carmen Electra. Funny, she also married Dennis Rodman, who was a Taurus. What did that last? About 2 days. Or Jack Nicholson, Taurus. He's got a Taurus vibe for sure. But apparently he's in really decrepit condition. The man with the top hat, Howard Carter. We got Willie Nelson, Taurus. Guess all those spliffs. Salazar, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, Taurus. Didn't Robert Pattinson play Batman? Malcolm X, Taurus. Very interesting. Interesting character, Malcolm X. Really dealt in very definitive terms, didn't he? In terms of his ideology. He broke some shit down. Looks like we had a few Nazis here under Taurus. Joachim von Ribbentrop, Alfred Jody, Gabriele Sabatini, Taurus. Marcus Aurelius, the man known for basically suffering, right? Austerity, pain. Taurus, the body. Enduring the pain of the body. Ho Chi Minh, the guy who's famous for Ho Chi Minh fish and chips. You know that famous Vietnamese fish and chips chain. Now this is the guy from the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He's a Taurus. And there's a lot of very political types here, and you can see that it has to do with power and money and resources. John Wilkes Booth. Here we go, right? We got John Cena, wrestler, physical. We have The Rock, wrestler, physical, both of whom are Tauruses. Billy Martin, Taurus. Reggie Jackson, Taurus, one of my favorite baseball players growing up. Hit one of the furthest home runs I've ever seen. It was the 1972 All-Star game in Detroit, where he hit it up to the light standard. Reginald Martinez Jackson, Taurus. This is Mercury and Gemini, motherfucker. John Brown, I guess John Brown's very. Samuel Morse, Mr. Morse code, right? Taking things out of the ethers and putting them into little bits of physical recognizability, right? Another big voice, Ella Fitzgerald. You'll see this with Tauruses. You'll see the big voices with Taurus. Vito Pilecki. Oh, we got another tyrant here. Taurus, what's up with you guys? Jim Jones. Jim Jones. That guy is Mr. CIA motherfucker. We'll do a chart on him one night. Janet Jackson. We got another voice here. The lovely Betty Page. Melanie Martinez. I don't know who she is, but I imagine her showing up on a Bud Light beer can in the future. Corey Monteith, Melania Trump. So yeah, a lot of Taurus. I've seen her chart. Ton of Taurus. Mary Astor, old filmmaker. Oh, you got Rudolph Hess, another Nazi. Some may say Tim McVeigh is a Nazi. I don't think so. Tim McVeigh, complicated character. Very complicated character. Taurus. Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, Taurus, another voice, Tammy Wynette. Great female vocalist under Taurus. Tim McGraw, Tug McGraw's bastard son, Taurus. Betsy Ross, Pierce Brosnan. I thought Pierce Brosnan was a great James Bond. I think he's an underrated James Bond. Edward II, Arthur Wellesley. And here we got another tyrant, Bono. This is a guy right here. This is a guy that went from being a really kind of incandescent and transcendent character into just the most despicable corporate fucking sellout ever. Can't stand the guy. I can't even listen to U2's music anymore. Al Pacino, Taurus, Chris Brown. A couple of dancers here. Look at that. Fred Astaire. Chris Brown can fucking dance, right? Back to back. Astaire and Chris Brown, Tauruses. Napoleon III, Alexander II, Florence Nightingale. She helped a few bodies along the way. Al Pacino, Taurus. Yogi Berra, Taurus. Edwin Land. Pretty interesting group there for the first 100, huh? Some surprising, tyrannical dictator types. We got to keep our eyes out for you, Taurus. Let's do another group here. See what we have. Jet Li, very physical. Not related to Harper Lee, though. They're very different people, even though they have the same last name. No, I'm just kidding. Calamity Jane, Taurus. So you can shoot. James Buchanan, a president. I've got a couple of presidents here. 3 presidents so far that are Taurus. Jerry Seinfeld is the epitome. That guy is fucking rich. You know, he and Jay Leno, I think Jay Leno's a Taurus too. They like have crazy car collections. You'll see this with Tauruses that collect things. Brahms, the composer, Taurus. Enya, the lovely Enya, Taurus. The guy started Bank of America. Speaking of money, 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 Amadeo Giannini started Bank of America. Money and other people's money. Taurus, Scorpio. Brooks Robinson, the great fielder for the Baltimore Orioles. Robert Browning, the poet. Abraham Gessner. Carol Burnett, who's still alive, by the way, and in pretty good shape. Love Carol Burnett. She's so funny. We got Frank Capra, the great director. Andreas Bader, Taurus. Joe Cocker, he big voice, strange voice, but again, a Taurus. You'll see this with Tauruses. Rules the throat. You can even hear kind of like Cocker's like challenge with the throat every now and then when he sings, but he's unmistakable, right? Henry Cavill played Superman. They need physical types. Taurus. Uma Thurman, who played, by the way, she played Venus. She played Venus in a Terry Gilliam movie. Remember, she emerges from the shell, right? Venus, Aphrodite, totally archetypal. Taurus. James Brown. Now, there is a physical motherfucker right there, right? That guy was physical, also very into money, paid his band members nothing. Like, Eddie was a Republican. James Brown was a Republican and a conservative. He wanted to know where his money was being spent. James Brown was not down with the cause. Let's put it that. In fact, Richard Nixon got so tired of James Brown coming to the White House. He said, we got to do something about this James Brown guy. He comes around here way too often. I swear to God, he loved Nixon, right? He's a Taurus. He loves his money, and he was physical, right? You know, when you're in your body, when you're really in your body, what do you get? You get James Brown. I feel good. Andre Agassi, Taurus. He had that stamina and endurance. Orson Welles, the boy wonder, known for radio first, and then, of course, cinema, Taurus. Kind of a dictator, too, in his own way. Mubarak, another guy, kind of a dictator. You know, he suffered he was a soft Saddam Hussein. They had a coup and he was gone, right? Another Taurus looking over the assets of the Seven Sisters. Robert Oppenheimer, the guy who ran the Manhattan Project. I think there's a new movie out about him. Gary Cooper, Taurus. Of course, he's the stand-up guy, right? In all the movies. Sugar Ray Robinson, another boxer. Taurus. Dali, Taurus. Very interesting. His rendition of the physical world, very strange, obviously. Father surrealism. It's like Taurus melting. Golda Meir, the first female. Has there been another female PM? She almost looks like she's Lyndon Johnson, doesn't she? There's something very masculine. She had very masculine power and traits. I think she was the first prime minister of Israel, female prime minister, if I'm not mistaken, right? Henry Fonda. It's interesting. Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart are both Tauruses. Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart, Gary Cooper, like these three icons. Three icons are Tauruses. Let's see. We got William Joyce, Jody May, Toussaint Louverture. This guy was. I think they just made a movie about him, or it's coming out soon. You know, he's a guy that said, "Hey, we're kind of done with this slave shit. We're kind of done with this, and I'm going to lead a rebellion here." Interesting character, Taurus. Gibbon, who wrote some very interesting stuff on history. Daniel Day-Lewis, a great actor. Honestly, I was surprised when he was a Taurus to find out he was a Taurus. But when you look at his chart, he's got a massive stellium of Taurus. And then when you look into his methodology of acting, it's physical. So when he did The Last of the Mohicans, he trained with like Army Rangers, and then he trained with this survivalist guy. Like he got into it, right? He really got into it. And he learned how to do all these things physically that he would have to do with his character in The Last of the Mohicans, which is a great movie, by the way. Really great movie. And so all the things that he did in the movie, he did those things, right? He did them because they were second nature. And then I think the last film he did, it was about like a shoemaker or something like that. So he actually went to Italy and actually learned how to make a shoe, from the sole to the stitching to everything, right? So when you look at Daniel Day-Lewis and his acting, it is not indistinct from being a Taurus. Like, he literally embodies the parts that he plays. It's very interesting character, because you think of like great actors as being Leos or Pisces, and they generally are the ones that shapeshift or like to be on the stage. But this guy is a great actor, and he's a great actor because he becomes the character. And how does he become the character? He actually embodies the character or the traits of the character even before he starts the movie. Really super interesting. Sigmund Freud, Taurus. All he cared about ultimately was money. We've covered him before. Robert Johnson. We kind of had this conversation at the beginning, didn't we? We were talking about Diddy. We were talking about these parties. Robert Johnson might be the archetype, the Plutonian archetype for selling one's soul, at the crossroads, doing a deal to become real. So, okay, let me say this. I talked about Bing Crosby as being kind of the first pop icon, because he is. He's kind of the first pop icon. He's the guy singing for the big band, and then Sinatra, and then Presley. Robert Johnson might be the first rock star. And he's got that Taurus Scorpio thing going on, right? He goes to the crossroads and he might be making a bit of a deal. Because apparently he was a shitty guitarist. And then all of a sudden he could play like a motherfucker, right? Chloe Kim, Taurus, Tony Hancock, Iggy Pop, who we covered the other day on the show. We got Megan Fox, another fighter, Nina Benvenuti. So Taurus, physicality, right? Physicality, the body. We got wrestlers, we got boxers. Kelly Clarkson, who was the first winner of American Idol, if I'm not mistaken, right? Another voice, Taurus. Tony Blair, another dictator, Taurus. Leopold II, Frederick Law Olmsted, I believe was an architect. Phyllis Wheatley. We'll just go through this last list here. Andy Murray, the tennis. We got some tennis players here. Gabrielle Sabatini, Andre Agassi, Andy Murray. Physical characters. Sugar Ray Leonard, another boxer. Physical. Glenn Campbell, love Glenn Campbell. Love Glenn Campbell. Part of the Wrecking Crew. Great voice, great guitar player. Taurus. Recorded, I think, one of the 10 best songs, 20 best songs of all time, Wichita Lineman. Edward Jenner, Taurus. Is this the guy that did the vaccine shit? Yep. Not a great person, in my humble estimation. Just saying. I know a bit about the dude. Rami Malek, who played Freddie Mercury, Taurus. George Lucas, Taurus. Machiavelli, another interesting character, all about what? Resources, power. Taurus is crafty, man. Those are should we go a little more? Mike Dirnt of Green Day, Taurus. Ricky Nelson, The Voice, Taurus. Kamehameha the First, Taurus. Paul Gross, Taurus. Jessica Alba, Taurus. Olga Korb, we got a couple of gymnasts here, Taurus. Paula Yates, the late Paula Yates, Taurus. Jessica Lange, Taurus. The late Bob Saget, Taurus. Phil Silver, Taurus. Benjamin Spock, the kook who told you how to raise your kids, Taurus. Kate Blanchett, Taurus. Didn't she play the Queen? She played Queen Elizabeth I, didn't she? Interesting. Shirley MacLaine, Taurus. Donnie Baseball, Taurus. So we've got some interesting Yankees there as Tauruses. Another tennis player, I hope Emily's watching the show. Yannick Noah, Taurus. Rossellini, the director, Taurus. The great poet, Rabindranath Tagore, Taurus. Johnny Unitas, quite possibly considered to be the first of the great modern American quarterbacks. Taurus was thrown in the scrap heap and found himself a career with the Baltimore Colts. Nellie Bly, Taurus. John Muir, the naturalist, Taurus. That kook, George Takei, Taurus. He's kind of a little fucking dictator, isn't he? He's got a little fucking dictator vibe, I have to say. Just saying. Let's see. Gary Kildall, Charles Watson Wentworth. Let's round it off here. Dale Earnhardt, Elijah McCoy, Clyde Fitch. There we go. 200 Tauruses. There's your random sampling of Taurus. Interesting. Very interesting. So what can we draw from that 200 random sample of those 200 personalities? A lot of big voices and singers, many of them female, right? We have physical types, wrestlers, boxers, baseball players. Andre the Giant, another wrestler. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, a wrestler. John Cena, a wrestler. Really embodying the sort of the Taurus physicality. There's it's going to be come right out and say it. There's some tyrannical types in there, right? There's some tyrannical types in there. And I'm not saying all Tauruses are tyrannical, but they understand the nature of power. And I think that is a really valid talking point for Taurus, whether it's monetary power or social power or political power, right? And remember, the opposite sign is Scorpio. So whenever you get into one sign, you're also dealing with the binary star of that sign. So when you see somebody like Pol Pot, by any means necessary, right? That's the Scorpio side of things. By any fucking means necessary. What's his name? Lenin, by any fucking means necessary, right? Hitler, Hitler's got the American corporations behind him, building everything up, right? Doing the same thing in Russia, by the way. You just see this. You see this stuff, and it's like, oh, wow, isn't that interesting? Machiavelli is breaking down how to acquire power, right? That's what The Prince is all about. Anybody, I guarantee you, Hitler read The Prince. I guarantee you that Lenin read The Prince. I guarantee you Pol Pot read The Prince. I bet you Jim Jones read the fucking Prince. It's Machiavelli, right? He's putting down the blueprint. Power, money, resources, human capital. This is a part of the sign. We also have the artistic part of the sign. It's interesting. It's like we have the Venusian side, we have the earthly side of it, right? And Earth, we really get into, 3D. Who's got the power? Who's got the resources? Who has the assets? And how are we going to acquire them? How are we going to accrue them? It's all part of the Taurus story. So we'll take, during Astro Weather, we'll go more in depth with some of these Taurus personalities. And we'll pick one each day as the star of the day to go further into the sign that has lovely and beautiful voices, typified really by even Uma Thurman, portrayed as Venus, arising out of the shell of Aphrodite, right? Like there's some really archetypal images associated with Taurus here. You think of somebody, like Joe Louis, like this guy, he was a bull in the ring. Joe Louis was a force, man. So, you get to see these archetypes really, played out in a, I'm still trying to wrap my head around Homer Simpson. Does he seem like a Taurus kind of lunkhead though? I mean, I'm not saying Tauruses are lunkheads, but Homer Simpson clearly has a love for certain foods, or so it seems. What's also interesting, he works at doesn't he work at a power plant, like a nuclear power plant? All that shit is Scorpio. That's Scorpio. When you get into nuclear power, you're getting into, like, when you get into theoretical nuclear power, that's alchemy. You're performing an act of alchemy, and you're taking these base elements, right? You're taking these base elements, and then you're splitting them, and then you're turning them into literally power. So it's all alchemical. And alchemy is a scorpionic and Plutonian act. It's exactly what it is. It's about transformation, right? So Homer Simpson works at a power plant, which is ruled by Pluto. There you go. All right. I wanted to get into. I'm going to take a shift things a little bit here. Why don't we here? Let's do this. Why don't we talk about Ron DeSantis? Because we're on the subject of power, right? It's a good transition. I think it's a really good transition. So let's talk about Ron DeSantis, and let's bring his chart up here. Now, again, this is the chart of DeSantis that I rectified. So let me just say that one of the disadvantages that DeSantis has is he's 5'9". Now you'll read some accounts that he might be 5'10". I think he's probably closer to 5'8.5". And generally, the rule of thumb is that it's very rare for a president under 6 feet to be elected. I think it's like the Harding rule or something like that. And if you look at all the presidents in recent history, they're all about 6 feet and over. I think Kennedy was like right at 6 feet. I think Johnson was like, what, 6'1". Nixon clocks in at about 5'11", I think. He's barely 6 feet. I'm not going to count Ford. He doesn't count. I think Jimmy Carter is around 6 foot, 6'1". I think Reagan is, 6'3". Reagan's kind of tall. George Bush Sr., I think, is around 6'2" or 6'3". Bill Clinton, I think, is around 6'1", 6'2". George Bush Jr., I think, is right at 6 feet. I think Obama is what, like 6'2" or 6'3". And Trump is pretty tall. I think Trump is 6'4". So out of that bunch, I think Nixon is the shortest, and he's kind of right at that 6 foot marker. I think you actually have to go back to Harry Truman, who's a Taurus, to find somebody who is distinctly under like that 5'11" mark as a president. So DeSantis already has a challenge. He's got a height challenge. Now, people may say, well, that doesn't really matter as long as he can lead. Okay, I get it, right? But and even Biden is not small. I think Biden is around 6'2". So there's something about this projection of power through height, and DeSantis doesn't have it. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't be elected. So he's also a Virgo, and the last Virgo president we had was Johnson. And he, of course, came into being president when Kennedy was killed, right? Like, that's how he assumes the presidency. And he becomes president, by default in 1963. And it's a year, right? It's a year. A year later, they have an election. And that would have been Kennedy's second term. And apparently Kennedy had some very interesting things in store for his second term, which are part of the alternate timeline. But I mean, Johnson's a slam dunk. How does he not get reelected? We're coming off of this absolute and utter tragedy. And if he was a standalone candidate, I think there's very little chance that Johnson gets elected. If he's not part of the Kennedy tragedy, legacy story, et cetera, right? There's no chance. No chance. He's got the Southern drawl. He's from Texas. He's not charismatic. He's not telegenic. And remember, we're in the age of television. That's why Kennedy was able to be so electable. He was the first telegenically elected president. Johnson doesn't fit the bill, even though in 1968, during the early polling, Johnson was looked like he would win against any of the Democratic challengers if he was primaried, and he was favored to win re-election. Although I don't know how, because those 4 years were, well, if you throw in the 1 year with from 63 to 64, those 5 years were 5 disastrous years for this country. Like, people complain about the Carter presidency and people complain about the Obama presidency. No president probably did more damage in 5 years than Lyndon Baines Johnson. And I live right down the fucking road from his town. Every time I drive past it, I go see, oh, a president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. The guy destroyed the fucking country. Okay. It's really interesting because, and I wanted to talk with Frank about this on a show, because they were talking about New York in the 70s and, why it was so bad in the 70s. And it had to do with what happened with the Great Society and the war on poverty and welfare. That's all Johnsonian. You're not here for a history lesson. You're here to hear about the Santis chart. But he's a Virgo. He's a Virgo. And when you look at his role as governor, he runs the state like a Virgo. Like, there's an efficiency to DeSantis. And I believe that DeSantis has some people behind him. We talked a little bit about this was on, I think, long ago show on Wednesday night, how DeSantis won by some incredibly small margin. He defeated Andrew Gillum, really small margin. And even Mike Lindell has come out and said, oh yeah, they threw the election for DeSantis in Miami. Like, that's where the extra votes came from. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But DeSantis had some very powerful people back in, including Sheldon Adelson. Right. So DeSantis, I think the power of DeSantis, and again, this is how I've lined up his chart, is Pluto. It's Pluto and it's Mars. Mars and Libra, I think he's able to make some deals with Mars and Libra, and Pluto in Libra enshrining his Aquarian moon. And his Aquarian moon is very, very different than his Virgo sun. We have an inconjunct. Virgo can be a little clinical at times. The Aquarian moon is very clinical. And the Aquarian moon can be extremely detached. And I think DeSantis is one of these characters who, if you look at his sun, it's kind of disassociative in some ways. Like, it's the inconjunct with the moon and then the square to Neptune. I mean, these are the two things that define his sun. It's weird. In this sense with the true node. And I think people that have the true node in proximity with their sun have a sense of destiny. That's what I think. It's kind of like the sun doubled. And I have the true node at 15. I have the true node at 17 Libra, and my true node at 17 Virgo, and my sun is at 29 Virgo. And so I don't have them quite conjunct, but I don't know, maybe it's just, my young hubris or pride, but I always felt like I had a sense of destiny. I think that has something to do with Jupiter in my chart, conjunct galactic center. That's a different, but I think that when you look at the sun true node conjunction, you can make a case for that. Like, a person feels like their purpose, right, or how they're supposed to evolve with the true node has a relationship with the sun. And if you look at his chart, he's just pre-eclipse, right? In roughly 2 days, that moon's going to move into Pisces, and he would have been born on an eclipse. So you see this in charts fairly frequently, either pre-eclipse moments at the birth or eclipse moments at the birth. And so it's an interesting kind of pre-eclipse moment. So his emotionality, right, which is being formed in these moments, right, by the mother. It's being formed. And it's really kind of an interesting thought to have, with the moon. Like, where's the moon in the chart? Where's the pre-eclipse moon in the chart? What's going on with your mother at the time? What's some of the psychological, the biophysical influences that are going into you just as you're about to come out, right? It's that moon. It's that moon right there in Aquarius. Interesting. It's almost clinical in some ways, like what was going on at that time? What was going on with his mother? How was she feeling? There's also that Pluto Mars trine to the moon. That's where the power comes from in his chart. Clearly. And I think that with that Aquarian moon, if you're not looking or not paying attention, it's sort of like this beacon of people. It's like the beacon of the moon for people in New York. Hey, come on down here. We're fair. We're fair in Florida. Right. In a lot of ways, it kind of gets into this idea of, Florida being like, and no offense to narco at all, but Florida being like the new Atlantis, right? And I feel like in some ways, DeSantis is sort of playing that role. Like, this is the place you want to be. This is where you're going to escape the tyranny of the other 49, let's just say. Just to round the number off, although we know that's not really true. But it's that moon in Aquarius. But it's really incredibly detached from who he is. So does DeSantis even believe his own rhetoric? I don't know. But he runs Florida very efficiently. Like, he's come in and he runs the state like a Virgo. Like I said, I think he has help. Now, one of the things that he also has is a military background. A lot of people don't understand this about DeSantis. The dude's military. And there are, accounts, whether they're true or not, of him being at Guantanamo. And being at Guantanamo during some of these sessions where guys are getting waterboarded. So was DeSantis involved in some of these things? Again, that's, I think, connected to this sun that seems to be very kind of detached in the chart, in this strange inconjunct with this very, at times, clinical moon in Aquarius. And it's not quite full, but it's getting there. And so what I did here is I put Pluto and Mars in the 12th house, because I thought to myself, if he's got military going on, it's in the background. And if he's got something with Guantanamo, it's 12th house. So I put Pluto there. And it kind of matches up with Leo on the midheaven. He has Jupiter in Leo. And I did a show a while back called the Leo Code. And I looked at all the various presidents over the last, I guess, since Kennedy. And when you go through their charts, you can make a case in almost all of them that there's a very strong connection to the sign of Leo, whether it's a true node, whether it's a Leo president, like say Obama, or a Leo president like Clinton, or you have somebody like Trump, who is Leo rising with Mars and Leo on the ascendant. Like, if you drill down, you can find all these correspondences with Leo inside the charts of everybody, almost everybody since Kennedy. And then here we have Jupiter Leo in DeSantis's chart. I'm like, okay, qualifies. There's a qualification there. And I just assigned this time because I was looking at the military piece with Mars in the 12th house and even Pluto in the 12th house. And also with Scorpio rising. And people who have Scorpio rising can be ambitious. It's a very, Scorpio rising is really interesting character, can be ambitious. And I kind of lined it up there so that Venus can be on the ascendant, because it's clear that Ron DeSantis has had help. When you look at somebody like Sheldon Adelson, who's a donor in other people's money, to me, that's very Venus and Scorpio on the ascendant, right? And even Uranus with the conjunction there, and how he kind of comes in and, overturns the tables on Andrew Gillum, and by the skin of his teeth gets the vote. And he also has this kind of, he's kind of a disruptor like Trump, but he also comes off as a more stable disruptor than Trump. And we can kind of see that, right, with Mercury and Saturn. He's got Mercury at 7, right? Mercury at 7, Virgo. So he's smart. DeSantis is no dummy. And he's got this conjunction with Saturn. So there's a part of him that is very Virgoan. It's detached from his identity. This is where the administrative part of DeSantis comes in. And he's got this sextile with Venus, and he's got this sextile with Uranus. So he appears to be a steady disruptor, right? That's how DeSantis comes across, as a steady disruptor. Can he be trusted? I don't think so. I don't think DeSantis, but again, I'm not sure any politician can be trusted. Let's just put it that way. DeSantis has aligned himself with the Bushes. That's clear. Both Bushes share the same college that he went to, which is Yale. They're all Yaleys, right? And I brought this out in Narco show, the Longo show, that he really fits the profile of the Bushes. They all went to Yale. They all played on the baseball team at Yale. All three of them played at the baseball. Now, I don't know if Ron DeSantis is skull and bones, but we know the other two Bushes were, right? So there's a bit of a Bush profile with Ron DeSantis. And we know that there is genuine bad blood between Trump and the Bushes. They don't like each other. I mean, no matter what you think about Trump as a rhino, or they do not like each other. They are like rival fucking gangs. And I would say Ron DeSantis is way more on the Bush side of the equation. So he's a steady disruptor based on this, right? Based on Mercury, Saturn, and then the sextiles with Venus and Uranus. But he does have this Sun-Neptune square. And the challenge with Sun-Neptune squares is that sometimes people have Sun-Neptune squares can have identity issues, particularly if there's nothing else going on with their charts. I mean, let's say you have a Sun-Neptune square, but then you have, let's say, Sun trine, I don't know, Saturn, okay? Like that would be easier. You'd almost have a choice. Do I play it straight and go with my Sun-Saturn trine and, take the Saturnian path, one foot in front of the other, next level, next level, next level, next level? Or do I cut corners, take the Sun-Neptune path, and try to, con my way to the top, right? It's almost like there'd be like a choice of conscience between those two. And maybe after exploring the perils of Sun-Neptune, you go, okay, I'll do Sun-Saturn, and that'll be my path. Or let's say you had a Sun-Mars trine, after Sun-Neptune and getting your nose bloodied a few times and dealing with things like potentially cowardice, or, you might opt into the Sun-Mars trine, and all of a sudden, you're dealing with life head on versus hiding out with a Sun-Neptune, so there are certain things, like it doesn't always have to be one way. The challenge with his chart is that there's either the Sun-Neptune square or there's the inconjunct with the moon, which doesn't give him as an individual, in my estimation, a lot of stability. Some of the other factors in this chart do. but himself, and maybe with the Sun Neptune square, maybe he could kind of stand up for the underdog. Maybe, right? Maybe there's some of that. Now, I don't know if Neptune is in his second house. I can't make that connection because I rectified his chart based on what I thought it might be this time. Be interesting to see if I was really close. But I think with Jupiter and Leo, squaring Mars, squaring Venus, I think he'll do what it takes. That's what I think. I think he'll do what it takes to get elected. That's what I think. That's my sense. And he has Chiron and Taurus. So he's part of that generation, that has a challenge with being in an Earth suit. But here's what I'll say about his chart and his electability. By the time we roll around to 2024, which is not that far away, like he's going to have Neptune on his south node. And it will be interesting to see what comes out during that time around Ron DeSantis. He's already got the Neptune Sun opposition going on right now. And that's an interesting opposition. I think Neptune can act. Sometimes it can lead to a bit of confusion on the individual's part, but it can also occlude the individual. It could be like a fog bank or a bit of a smokescreen in some ways. So when we have a Neptune opposition with Ron DeSantis, maybe the Ron DeSantis you get is the Ron DeSantis you want to see. If you want to see Ron DeSantis as somebody who's managed the whole post-COVID Florida situation as a reliable Virgo administrator, that's what you'll get. If you want to see Ron DeSantis in a different light with the Neptune Sun opposition, maybe that's the version of Ron DeSantis you'll get. But with Neptune on his south node around the election, that'll be very interesting. Like what will be revealed during that time about Ron DeSantis. And trust me, Trump will do everything in his power to, Trump has not been kind to DeSantis or the state of Florida. In fact, he just came out with a video that just dumped on the state of Florida. And this is a state the guy lives in, for crying out loud. And when you see a video like that, you have to wonder, like, is he throwing it for DeSantis? I mean, this is really weird. This last video that he was on with the Nelk boys, whoever they are, like this, almost overnight, outrageously popular podcast that everybody has to be on. Anyway, yeah, like it's kind of weird. The whole thing is just kind of weird. Pluto is going to be at 29 on election night. Maybe it favors his true node a little bit in trine with his true node. I think he's getting a bit of a boost and has been with Uranus. He's gotten through the Uranus opposition, so any kind of midlife crisis shit, he's sort of gone through that. He's got Pluto's in opposition with his Jupiter, right now. And it will be all the way up through the election. Again, we just had a talk about Pluto and resources and what's on the back end, right? Keep your eye on the money with DeSantis. You want to keep an eye on the donors. If DeSantis is able to run up a big war chest prior to, and he's already announced, right? He just announced 2 days ago. Shit, I should have done the chart. We'll do a part two. We'll do part two next week. Keep an eye on his war chest. If he amasses a lot of money, he's going to win. He'll certainly win the Republican nomination. It's that Pluto. It's that Pluto in opposition with Jupiter. It's right there right now, right? And he has Pluto squaring Mars. again, I just come back to this is a person that will do whatever it takes in order to get elected. That's my, and don't, and again, you have to look at like these connections he has with the Bush family. I think they matter. They mean something. That's a political establishment, huge political establishment. And of course, who's in Florida? Jeb Bush used to be the governor. All right. So next week, we'll take a look at the decision for DeSantis to, because he announced he's running, right? Is this a presidential chart? I'd say Jupiter and Leo qualifies it. If we're looking at Leo as being a qualifier for being a president, I would say 100% yes. Just because of Jupiter. I think he knows how to call in a favor. And I think all the Virgo in his chart is certainly helpful. He does have that Mercury Neptune square. Okay, now we got 3 squares: Sun, Mercury, Neptune, Saturn. Sun, Mercury, Saturn, Neptune. Dude's got skeletons. He's got skeletons. It'll be interesting to see what happens when Neptune approaches his, it's kind of on his south node now, but it's retrograding. It's going to come back again. It'll definitely be there on election, election season. He's got skeletons. He definitely has skeletons. And even with Mercury, Neptune, Mercury, Saturn, he's got more squares to Neptune than Trump does. And Trump's got a few, mostly Mercury. He's got Saturn, Mercury, and the Sun. He'll say and do whatever it takes. That's my sense with DeSantis. And if you look at somebody who would use that as a tool to be elected, then even that would be electable, right? Because when you do that, there's always favors because you're owned at that point. And I think he has a chart that has some spiritual debt in it. Let's put it that way. I 100% think that Ron DeSantis could be elected president of the United States. And a lot of it has to do with this right there, Jupiter and the squares. And just keep an eye on, if you see him rack up a lot of money in terms of donors and a big war chest, it's almost a fait accompli. Now I think Gavin Newsom is going to primary Joe Biden. Robert F. Kennedy will be a bit of a wild card. Some people think that Kennedy will make mincemeat out of Newsom. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just go back and look at the last 2 times the Democrats tried to get Bernie Sanders in as president. He, in both instances, 2016 and 2020, especially in 2016, he was whooping Hillary's ass. He was whooping her ass. And they basically said, we don't give a fuck. In Nevada, they told all the delegates, we don't care. Your votes don't matter. Hillary's winning this. Right? So it doesn't matter if RFK is able to, use the Kennedy magic or, try, take on Newsom. At the end, it doesn't matter. What matters is who they want for president. And I'm pretty convinced that they want Gavin Newsom to be president. And that's why he's going through all these states in the South. Like he's just running through, he's already fucking campaigning. And what's interesting is that if it is a DeSantis, Newsom runoff, I think DeSantis could win. If it's a reasonably quote unquote fair election, whatever the fuck that is. He's got Mars in Libra. He's got Pluto in Libra. Gavin Newsom's a Libra. I think he could beat Newsom just based on his astrology alone. I think he beats Newsom. So does that mean that DeSantis is the next president of the United States? I guess we'll find out. Keep an eye on the fundraising, and keep an eye on that Neptune South Node conjunction. So the dude's got secrets. All right. I hope you got something out of that with DeSantis. All right. I want to shift gears, and I want to get into this movie a little bit that I saw last night with John Waite. And if you have Amazon Prime, I highly recommend this movie. And let me give you a visual of John Waite. Some of you might know who he is. He was a lead singer for a band called The Babies. And then he had a solo career. And then he sang with a group called Bad English. And Jonathan Cain was in that group. And Neil Schon was in that group. So these are some images of John Waite. This is kind of what he looks like now. This is what he looked like when he was young. And some interesting, he's an interesting character. This is him when he was young with the Babies. And this is Ignition, produced by Neil Giraldo, Pat Benatar's husband. Great song in there, Change. This is kind of more what he looks like now. He's got really long hair. This is really what he looks like now. And he's a really, really interesting character in a lot of ways. I highly recommend the documentary, because what you see somebody who is really dealing with COVID, right? He can't tour, and he's really torn up because this is like the touring thing and getting out. You'll see his chart why it's a big deal. And he's in a lot of ways very uncompromising, and maybe in some ways it's a detriment. And he's got this spirit about him, where he's a real fighter, right? He even talks about getting his ass kicked in school a lot. And so it's kind of this story about where he grew up, how he grew up, and what happens to him with his band. And it's amazing how many records they sold, and they never made any money. And he talks about that. And he eventually winds up buying back a lot of his catalog, and is still touring to this day. And he has a piece inside of the documentary where he encounters Alison Krauss. And, I don't want to get this video taken away, right? So what I did is I clipped some of the dialogue from a part of the documentary where he's talking about Alison Krauss. And he's talking about how he meets her. And he winds up doing a duet with her on Missing You, which becomes a hit, and it reignites his career. The story about how he meets her and their charts will blow you away. Okay. They're going to blow you away. And even John Waite's chart, in a lot of ways, is a lesson in astrology. So let's let me bring up this chart. And again, it's one of these charts that I had to rectify. And I have some stills from the documentary. I can't play the whole thing. but I have some stills from the documentary that I worked with a little bit here. So one of the things that is really interesting about John Waite is his birthday. So he's born on July 4th, 1952 in England, in Lancaster. And you can kind of get a sense of his chart here. Sun in Cancer, 12 degrees. Uranus in Cancer at 14, Venus in Cancer. He has this really, really tight stellium. And you can see all the kind of restless energy that's bound up in John Waite. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is very early on in the video, in the documentary, he would run out from school and he would run to this store, and this is what he saw in the store, and it completely captivated him and his imagination. And it's Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs by Marty Robbins. And he talks a lot about this image and how it kind of burned into his brain, right? It really burned into his brain. And he saw himself as this Marty Robbins kind of figure, right? He saw himself as this sort of romantic, archetypal, kind of lone gunfighter, right? And it's very American. It's very, very American. Like he's not being influenced by Churchill, or he's not being influenced by Errol Flynn, right? It's Marty Robbins. And when you look at his chart, his sun is conjunct the sun in the United States, right? It's right there, July 4th. And ultimately, this is where he's going to live. He's going to live in New York, and then he's going to live in Santa Monica, but mostly in New York, later in Santa Monica. So you can even see here, right, like this idea of America, born on the 4th of July in Lancaster, England, winds up playing a bit of a role in his life. And so the next three kind of important figures are Tommy Steele, who was kind of an English rock and roller, and then the Beatles, right? Those are the three next big stops on John Waite's career path. And then he winds up getting a ukulele, I think. And I think it might have had Tommy Steele's decal on it. And then it's a really funny story. The decal falls off, and he looks at the ukulele, and it's in the shape of Mickey Mouse's head. And he realized that somebody just bought a bunch of ukuleles from Disney. And I think they stuck Tommy Steele's decal on the ukulele, and it peeled off. And he said, that was my first run-in with the music industry, right? And that it was just all fake. And it's a really interesting story. So anyway, this image connects with John Waite in a very particular way. He sees himself as the gunfighter balladeer in a lot of ways, right? It's really fascinating. And he's always, I mean, you look at his chart, he's got Mars and Scorpio. He's got this intense Mars and Scorpio in his chart right here. And he's got Jupiter and Taurus. So he wants to be a singer. He's a bass player, but he wants to be a singer. And eventually he does become just a singer, right? And he's got this Mars and Scorpio, and he's got a temper. Man, you can see his temper in the movie. He's got Mercury and Leo square Mars and Scorpio. And, you know, if you're on the right side of John Waite, he'll love you. If you're on the wrong side of John Waite, look out. Like, you can see it in the movie. And loyalty is a big deal for him. You can tell in the movie. He's got, you know, he gets fucked over more than once in this documentary. And he's got these hard squares with Neptune, right? Remember I talked about the stuff with Saturn and Neptune, and he's got both, right? He's got the Saturn square and he's got the Neptune square. So he's got to fight, like he's got to swim against the tide. You know, John Waite is the runt of the litter. This is what he's got, because he has these institutional forces that just are pushing down on him. You'll never amount to anything, you know, and it could absolutely crush his confidence with that, you know, very sensitive Sun in Cancer squaring, you know, Neptune squaring and squaring Venus. And you just tell, like, it could just crush him. But then he's got the squares with Saturn, so he's always got to push back and you know, pick himself up. It's really, really interesting. Like, he gets into this story where there's a teacher that tells him he'll never amount to anything, and really vehement. And he went to the United States and had, you know, a bunch of hit records. And he came back and he was in a shop in England, in the teacher shop. It was like a coffee shop or something. And he recognized the teacher. She was there, and he was a fucking rock star. And he said, I never said anything to her. And I think that actually said a lot about John Waite. Like, he could have just buried her if he wanted to, and he didn't. But in his heart, he knew that he had achieved something, had accomplished. And it's right here, right? Like, this is exactly what I was talking about, but a little bit different with Neptune, Saturn. Like, Ron DeSantis is all the Neptune squares, but he doesn't have the challenges with Saturn. Like, fuck it, I'm going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. This is what John Waite did. It's really, really interesting. And even with Mars, like, he has this regenerative ability with the Mars trine to the sun. Very interesting character. So let me show you his report card. It's in the documentary, right? Like, this you can see his chart in the report card. D+, C+, B-, C+, C+, D+, C. Capable of much better. There has been a decline in John's standard of work this term. C. Satisfactory. Steady work. John must realize that great concentration is required for practical as well as academic subjects. He's pretty good at art. He was pretty good at art. That was the thing that kind of carried him through. Right? It's very interesting. More effort needed. Religious instruction, more effort needed. English written oral did pretty well there, I guess. This and at times produces truly pleasing work. Okay. He's average. He's average or below average, right? And this stuff fueled him. You know, it fueled him, right? Totally fueled him. And that's where you get into the square with Neptune and Saturn. All right. Let me play you the Alison Krauss stuff, because this is really interesting. And I tried to do it in a way where I'm not going to get chipped by YouTube. So pardon my editing. I did it right for the show. And you're going to hear him talk about Alison Krauss. I got a few slides in here. And what I really wanted to portray is how he winds up feeling. You'll get to see how he feels at the end of this video. And then I'm going to bring their charts together, and you're going to get a very interesting bird's eye view of astrology, synastry, and some aspects here. All right, so let me play this. And again, I apologize for the editing, but you'll get what I'm talking about, especially at the end. Here we go. A little bit of a lead in, a little bit of silence, but eventually it'll come around. I did this just before the show.
Carry me back to the lone prairie.
But I thought, who would I really love to sing with? And I had been spending a lot of time watching the American Music Channel, which was all country music. New Favorite had just come out, and Alison was in heavy rotation. I think it was the first time I actually heard her sing, and it was really engaging. She was the queen of it. I would wait for her videos to come around, you know. And I was buying some LPs in a second-hand music store, and I walked out on the street, and she drove past, and she stopped. She leaned out the window and said, "Hey, how you doing?" You know, hamming it up. And I was just like, wow, it's Alison Krauss. And we talked on the street. It was really great, you know. If you're going to meet somebody, it's great to meet them like that, you know, because I was like, how do I do this, you know? But she was really lovely, open, friendly, serious about the song. We cut the song, and I went home and listened to it, and there was something wrong with it. And I think it was me, because it's a duet, you know? You have to answer somebody's performance for it to work. Whereas before, I think I'd done it like a performance. So I sang it differently. I sang it completely differently for Alison. And then she sang her part, and it was like, there it was, you know. It was fantastic. But I ain't missing you at all. And we wound up on the Jay Leno show doing the duet of Missing You. I just remember trying not to talk too much. I was like nervous, you know, 'cause she's an incredibly intense artist. She's really the real thing, you know, and you start to wonder if you could measure up. It's Ringo territory, you know.
Who could be better? Lots of people.
When I was singing Missing You in the studio, she hit the talk back and said, "This is really great." And I smiled, you know, because that was praise from somebody that I
Take a minute.
yeah.
It's all right.
All right. That's the scene I wanted you to see. And I actually edited that one in pretty well, because this is him reacting to Alison Krauss. This is a guy that was in love. Really, really in love. And very unreconciled. Look at him. He's all torn up inside. Look at him. You know, and one of the things I've always said about cancers is that they're very soulful people. Right. And right now, John Waite is just like living with this fucking heart on his sleeve right here. The guy's in a relationship. His girlfriend's in the video. And if I'm his girlfriend, I'm like, oh, I got a distant second to Alison Krauss. Look at this. Oh, that's me. Right? Look at this. I'll play it again. Just watch this. We're right into the lead in.
Praise from somebody that I
Take a minute.
yeah.
It's all right.
It's the weirdest feeling to sing lyrics that you wrote.
So there you go. Now, I don't know how the fuck did that get in there? Anyway, so when I looked at their charts, I was pretty blown away. Pretty darn blown away. So I don't know John Waite's birth time, but I know Alison Krauss's birth time. So we got a bead on Alison Krauss. And that's her in the center. 0 Leo. July 23rd, 1971, 7:48 p.m., Decatur, Illinois. Capricorn rising. Leo sun, right? So here's what I want you to pay attention to. So John Waite has Sun, Venus, and Uranus in Cancer, and Alison Krauss has Venus in Cancer. Right, that's her Venus right there, right there, 20 degrees. 20 degrees. Venus in Cancer. Waite, of course, has Venus in Cancer, so they're conjunct. And he's got that Uranus. So he basically met her on the street spontaneously. And you'll see this with Venus and Uranus. It was just like that, right? Like the synchronicity of him watching her on the videos. And he pops out of the record store and bang, there she is. Right. And he winds up having a working relationship with her. Sun, Venus, 6th house. I tell you right now, this guy, I don't know what their story was outside of the song, but I can tell you this, he was in love with this woman. And you look at like her moon and his Pluto, right? Right there, conjunct in Leo. And then his south node conjunct her moon. And then she's got this south node conjunct her moon and his Pluto. And man, they're all up in here in this duet territory, right? That's why it's so good. And for John Waite, I can tell you right now, he was very attached to this person. She also played an extremely important role in his career, right? There's her moon in Taurus, conjunct his Jupiter, and it resurrected his career. And with the moon, you know, you're also dealing with things that are, especially like in the 10th house, it's not like the sun, which is, you know, we're going to have a plan and we're going to have a map and, you know, this is how we're going to get there. With the moon, it's very serendipitous. It's sort of like it's like the yin to the sun's yang. And so with the moon, it's like you're acted upon. And then she's right there, right on top of his Jupiter. And there's his Neptune. And there's also this romantic connection between the two. You know, and I think it's hard to get sorted out. You know, and I bet it fucking, let's see, was she worked with Robert Plant too, didn't she? I wonder how you felt about that. But you just see it, it's all over here, you know, it's all over. It's the spontaneity of Venus, Uranus, and then him showing up at her workhouse. And then even her true node conjuncting, or his true node rather, conjuncting with her Mars. And they both have nodes kind of, you know, in the same area, right? Her true node is in Aquarius and his true node is in Aquarius, 22 and 12. and their south nodes are both in the same sign too, right? So they're aligned with these axes. And even with Aquarius, you're dealing with kind of this Uranian spontaneity. And it's so fascinating that in a lot of ways, they kind of connect these circuits. When you look at Alison Krauss, she kind of looks masculine. She's, attractive woman. She's got that kind of a masculine face. And, you can see that with Mars in the first house. Then she's got, Venus and Cancer. And even here in her chart, it's on the descendant, she's got the duet with weight. She's got the work with plant. She's all about the duet, right? This is where she can really, really shine. It's really, to me, this is the fascinating. This guy was in love with her. You can just tell, bound up in all this Leo over here, the south node and her moon and Jupiter and the moon in the 10th house. And, again, super, super powerful. Right. Anyway, that's her Jupiter. That's his moon right there. My bad. His moon is in Scorpio, her Jupiter. He also has, well, in the chart that I have, he has Jupiter, but that's his moon. That's the capriciousness of his moon, right? That's interesting. She didn't plan it out. It all just happened. That's her Jupiter in the 10th house. Where's his Jupiter again? It's in Taurus, right? It's going to be on the other side. That's his Jupiter. So they even have Jupiter oppositions. Doesn't quite show it here, but they do. And it's his moon that conjuncts her Jupiter. Oh man, he was really stuck on Alison Krauss. You can tell he felt very highly of her, and more than just highly of her. And he was in love with her. Anyway, the spontaneity of the Venus-Uranus action, like he's got it in his chart, and the spontaneity, that connection on the street, right? She drives by, howdy, it's right there, right there. And then even all the duet stuff, right? That's his Mercury in her 7th house duet. That's his Pluto in her 7th house. South node, Mercury, Pluto, man, just, you got these moon aspects, your moon Pluto, moon Jupiter. Intense. Very intense. Nothing casual about it, and especially with John Wade as a Cancer. Soulful dude. Anyway, just wanted to plunge into that a little bit, mostly because of the story and the spontaneity, which you can see here, and then the depth and then the intensity. And you could tell he was totally in love with this woman. And he was just a mess at the end of that segment. He's out on the road. He's still touring. I highly recommend the documentary. It will renew your faith in humanity a little bit. It's somebody who has some character and some grit and stayed in the game and ultimately did it his own way. Still out there, and it's sad in parts, it's triumphant in parts, it's humorous in parts, it's frustrating. You see, he had this really interesting moment in time where he could either tour with Ringo for a year and be a singer, or he could probably, I think it might have been like Pirates of Penzance or some shit like that. Like Broadway was knocking on John Wade's door, and he chose Ringo, who's another Cancer. And he toured with him for a year. Who knows what would happen if he'd gone on Broadway? He could have been a Broadway star. Who knows? But he's a rock and roller at heart, and that's what he wanted to do. And he wanted to play with one of his childhood idols. And so, Ringo rang him up. And he said, "Yeah, I'm in." So he was with his band for a year. That's part of the story as well. Check it out, John Wade, on Amazon. It'll be worth your time. Okay, a lot of astrology tonight. 9/11. Let's tap out. If you're interested in reading, go ahead and book one with me, robertphoenix.com, and be happy to do that for you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, mods, for being here and taking care of business. Thank you, Dr. Joan. for all your love and support. And thank you to Chataria and everybody else who is a part of this, right? We're all part of this. Whatever this is, we're all a part of it. And you know, I couldn't do the show. I wouldn't be motivated to do the show unless I was doing it for somebody else, i.e. whoever is watching it on the other side. So thank you for watching and participating. And, you know, we're in this thing now. You know, we're in this thing for whatever this thing is. And I'm in it, and I'm in it to the end, whatever that is. And we'll be back here next Sunday night, and we'll do more astrology. We'll get into it, whatever it is. We'll get into it. Friday, I think it's Russ Winter Friday. This Friday, so it's Tales from Winterland, and looking forward to that over on the Friday Forecast. Catch me on 15 Minutes of Flame Tuesday through Thursday at 9:11 a.m. where I get into a bunch of other stuff. All right. Thanks. Love to all. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to step what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Take care and bye for now.